Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. So what am I doing today? Much to my chagrin and sort of like an oops moment, I talked about my Booktube Prize books. I was a judge to judge a literary prize here on Booktube called the Booktube Prize, and I was judging 6 nonfiction books. And as the round closed, so of my 6, 3 would move forward. I judged with a whole bunch of other judges here on Booktube. And so of my 6 books, 3 moved forward. And when I talked about the 3 that didn't move forward in my wrap-up video a couple of days ago, I made this really kind of big deal about how I cannot talk and I was sworn to secrecy about the books that moved on. So I thought I couldn't talk about the books that were still in the contender to be in the Booktube Prize. That is not true. I found out very kindly from many of you, both behind the scenes and in my comment section of that video, that I can talk about all 6 books. And I have, I can share my thoughts and opinions about all of them. And as I've been going through watching your videos here on Booktube about the way that you ranked your books, I was like, well, I want to share how I ranked my books too. And so that's what this video is. If you don't know who I am, or if this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, then hi, I'm Shelly and I love books and reading. I am really into literary prizes this year, the Booktube Prize being one of them. I'll leave some information down below if you don't know what the Booktube Prize is, but it is, in short, it is a literary prize ran here on Booktube asking for readers like me to be judges for certain categories. So today what I'm going to be doing is talking through my rankings of all 6 books for the Booktube Prize while I'm getting ready. I have some foundation on. I'm kind of barefaced and messy right now. I've been up for a couple of hours. My husband got home from Ireland last night. He walked into our home about at 1:30 in the morning. And so I did fall asleep earlier, but I woke up around 1:30 hearing his little noises and I greeted him. But from about 1:30 until 5:30, I had some rough sleep, and then around at 5:30 I woke up and got up, and it's about 8 a.m. right now. So I've been in this state for a little while, and I'm not gonna lie, I was in my pajamas and I just sort of threw on a sweater. And so yeah, so I'm gonna be getting ready with you this morning while I'm talking through my thoughts regarding the books that I judge for the Booktube Prize. So I believe I judged Nonfiction Group E. If that's wrong, I'll flash it on the screen, and I'm sorry. But it really doesn't matter what group I had, it just matters the books and what matters is the books that I read and how I ranked them. So coming in at number 6. If you want some more detailed thoughts also about the bottom 3, I will leave a link to my wrap-up video that I did just a couple of days ago, because I talked through the rankings of the bottom 3 rather heavily and I don't want to repeat myself too much. Okay, let's just get into this video. So, coming in at number 6, I have my computer right here. That was Beloved Beasts, Fighting for Life in the Age of Extinction by Michelle Nijhuis. This was published in 2021, and it was published by W.W. Norton Company. Okay, so what I thought this book was about, I'm just going to talk about what the book was about and what didn't work for me. So the book was about the history of conservation starting in the late 19th century with Carl Linnaeus, who was a very famous taxonomer, and it moves all the way through the history of conservation, the ups and downs of the conservation movement and the strides that the movement has made, all the way up until present day and what certain colleges like Virginia Tech are doing for the movement of conservation. And also the grassroots efforts down in Africa, in South Africa, I believe. I'm sorry if I got that wrong, but the grassroots effort down in South Africa to help some of the species that are living there and that are struggling with extinction right now. This book was not written for me. Let me tell you that for sure. This book was written for somebody who was interested in conservation. And so as somebody, I'm interested in conservation, but the book has to be entertaining in some way. And this book, Michelle Nijhuis's writing was very, very dry in my opinion. And though she had a very good idea of talking about the history of conservation, this book wasn't marketed that way. this book felt like it was marketed for animal lovers who are concerned about extinction. And instead, I really read about the history of the 200 years of conservation, which was quite dry. And I really didn't get a sense of Michelle Nijhuis's personality. I got a sense that she was a good researcher, but as far as a writer goes, you know, okay, kind of dry, and just really wasn't my thing at all. If you all liked it, if you all have read this book and you liked it, can you tell me what I missed? I would be curious to know. Coming in at number 5 was The Codebreaker, which is subtitled, I have my computer here, Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing and the Future of the Human Race, which was written by Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson is a career writer. He writes for a career, and he often does biographies. He did the very famous biography about Steve Jobs, but he's also done a lot of historical biographies. And so this is just yet another book in Isaacson's, you know, body of work that is another biography. What I didn't like about this was that I felt like this was mismarketed. I feel like, it said that it was the biography of Jennifer Doudna, and I felt like it really focused on current events quite a bit more than Jennifer Doudna as our main heroine for the story. There was a lot of meandering. It was pretty unfocused. I got a sense that Isaacson was a really good writer, that he has spent a lot of time developing his craft. And so the book read well. I was able to follow even though I'm not a sciencey person. What I didn't like was that Isaacson was he checked a lot of boxes. He made it really clear where he stood on very specific sort of popular issues right now. And, you know, was very scathing to certain people who would like to use gene editing or had the ambitions to use gene editing in maybe a morally gray way. And it's like, well, you're scathing because that's kind of how you should look at things. And I really got a sense that Walter Isaacson was doing a lot of box checking with this. He was like writing about a woman in science right now, and she had a lot to do with developing the technology to test for our COVID testing, not for any type of vaccinations, but she helped develop how we test for COVID. And it just seemed very on the nose. There was just something that really felt insincere about it, and I couldn't shake that feeling. This feeling of insincerity, this cash grabbiness, this idea that maybe that Isaacson only got a publishing deal because he was writing about this very specific sort of trendy topic during this very specific time when we are all into this trendy topic. I wouldn't necessarily sway anybody from not reading The Codebreaker. If you are interested in CRISPR and RDA and gene editing and the moral complications with that, this book is a good book. But if you're looking for a biography about Jennifer Doudna, this is really not the book for you. This book, definitely, The Codebreaker reads more like a book about current events, talking about a very specific sliver of the science world. And it covers the years of like 2016 to 2020. Okay, so I quickly finished just getting ready while my camera battery charged, because that's just something else that didn't go my way this morning, which is fine. But I didn't charge my batteries. Okay, my camera battery rather, and I didn't charge myself, like sleeping well enough, so my batteries aren't charged very well either. So that works on a couple different levels. Okay, coming in at number 4 is Facing the Mountain by Daniel James Brown. The subtitle is A True Story of Japanese American Heroes in World War II. And this was published in 2021 by Viking. Okay, so let's talk about this. The premise is this. In the United States during World War II, the Japanese Americans were treated pretty horribly. A lot of them were taken to stadiums, which were internment camps that they weren't allowed to leave. And it was because of the conflict that America was having at Japan at the time, during World War II. So this was happening, and that is kind of explored, but this is really a setup. The internment camps and these folks living in internment camps is a setup to explore the next generation down, the young men who were not allowed to join the US military because of their ancestry in Japan. Then through some events, those rules get changed, and a division is formed, a special combat troop called the 442nd, and it is full of Japanese American young men who really want to serve the United States and have a lot of gusto. And then the story takes a shape from there. It follows the 442nd Regiment through where they traveled and their successes and failures, and particularly some of the men that served in that regiment. Now, here's what I thought was great. Daniel James Brown can really write a character. I mean, I felt like that's where his writing really shined well. I had a favorite character. I had a least favorite character. I wanted to know what happened. I was invested in the lives of these young men and their stories. Here's what Daniel James Brown didn't do so well. So clearly there is a lot of discrimination going on during this time, especially against Japanese Americans because of the political climate at the time. And so what Brown tries to do is sort of zoom in on a character and then sort of pull back and talk about discrimination that was going on at that time as a whole, and then zoom back in on a character, and he cannot transition. Like, those transitions were so stinking jarring. I would be like following a character, I'd be following like the character Rudy, and I'd be like in his story and really enjoying it, and then all of a sudden I'd be like reading sort of something else and then brought back to Rudy, and I didn't like that. I really wish that we would have had sort of an introductory chapter of like the history of racism and discrimination against Japanese Americans at that time, so that we walked in and we could just enjoy the story throughout. I think also some of that commentary was heavy-handed and a bit on the nose, which is kind of a theme for me. And it's like, did you get a book deal because you're talking about discrimination against Asian Americans, which is really popular right now? And then also the messaging, that specific messaging was just really, really heavy-handed. And also, I'm not somebody who doesn't know about the discrimination that Japanese Americans faced. My grandmother is Japanese, and she lived in the United States for like 50 years. And so it's something that I've been talked about. So on a couple of different levels, this book didn't work for me, but I could see why the other judges liked it, and I could see why it moved on. And I'll be interested as to see where this lands in the future. Okay, coming in at number 3 was A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ghríofa. So this is a memoir. It is Doireann Ghríofa's memoir, and it's focusing on a time in her life when she recently had a little baby girl, her little baby girl, and she is starting to reflect on what does it mean to be a mother of a girl. And around this same time, she remembers a poem. I should probably say at the beginning, Doireann Ghríofa is an Irish writer. She's a poet. And so anyways, she gets, as she's having her first girl, she gets really interested in a poem written by a lady that was written in the 1700s. And so Ghríofa sort of is ruminating, thinking about what does it mean to be a mother and a woman in our society, and then she starts thinking about the role of women in history and that how women have been marginalized and erased and what that all means. And then also she's focusing on this very particular period in her life where she has breastfed her children, and then she's also stopping breastfeeding and what that journey means to her. Now, I could connect with Doireann Ghríofa on a couple of different levels. I love poetry, I love language and literature, probably not to the extent that she loves it, but I could share in her passion for that. I also really enjoy history and research to an extent, and I also am a mother who has had children and breastfed and stopped that and done that whole journey. So I could connect with Doireann Ghríofa on that level. Some of the things that I thought, I don't want to say they didn't quite work for me, but I did notice them as something that maybe won't work for other readers, and it's that there isn't a really strong story to this book. It reads like a very well edited diary. It's interesting. It talks all about Doireann Ghríofa's research journey as she is researching this Irish poet from the 1700s, and she's wondering what happened to her. And so it feels like a diary of motherhood and also when somebody is like getting obsessed with a research project and follows that obsession and notes it down and takes notes about it. And so what this book felt like, again, I'll repeat myself, but it felt like a really well edited diary. And I like that. I don't think, I'm wondering as to why it gets as much praise as it does. But it worked for me. I didn't rank it at number 3. I thought it was really interesting. And again, I think the word is edited. The book felt edited, which I really quite liked. And I cannot say that about other books previously. My number 2 book actually didn't move forward in the Booktube Prize. I'm kind of surprised, but then kind of not at the same time. So let's just talk about it. So it's The Sinner and the Saint by Kevin Birmingham, and the subtitle is Dostoevsky and the Gentleman Murderer Who Inspired a Masterpiece. And this was published in 2021 by Penguin Press. So what Birmingham sets out to do is to talk about the portions of Dostoevsky's life that could have influenced his writing of Crime and Punishment. And he also, Birmingham, focuses on this gentleman murderer named Nijhuis, who is a French murderer, sort of upper middle class criminal, who holds a similar resemblance to Raskolnikov. Isn't that right? Raskolnikov, who is the villain or the bad guy in Crime and Punishment. And so Kevin Birmingham sets out to connect that this murderer, this real-life murderer, Nijhuis, influenced Crime and Punishment and the writing of it. And what didn't work for me is that he couldn't quite prove that theory. He couldn't quite bring the two stories together. But here's what Birmingham did really, really well. He was able to talk about Russia in the 1800s and what was going on politically and in terms of religion and in terms of society and the way that society was functioning at that time. He talks quite a bit about Dostoevsky and the very fascinating life Dostoevsky lived, because he was a political prisoner for a good portion of his life and did serve time alongside murderers during his life, which was really fascinating. Kevin Birmingham also discusses Crime and Punishment, and as a lover of language and literature, as he was summarizing and analyzing parts of Crime and Punishment, I was really into that. I was like, this is really interesting. And I think part of that is just who I am, my interest in language and literature, as I mentioned. And so watching someone else break down a book was really cool. I could see why it didn't work for some people. I would actually want to know, if this book didn't work for you, will you let me know why? But here's the weird thing. I have bought this book for 4 people. I had my book, which I gave away to my dad, and then I've bought it for 3 other people around the booktube space. And here's the deal. I read this and then I watched Elizabeth's review from Bookins and Books. I'll leave her link. I will leave Elizabeth's review link down below. We both had very similar thoughts and feelings about The Sinner and the Saint, but I've not read Crime and Punishment. I am really taking Birmingham's writing and just going with it, and I can't really even judge how he broke down those portions of Crime and Punishment, or if perhaps the gentleman murderer has a connection to Raskolnikov that I don't know, because I haven't read Crime and Punishment. So all of those gifts that I have, me gifting The Sinner and the Saint, I've been giving them to readers who have read and enjoyed Crime and Punishment. And I've been kind of sneaky about it. My sneakiness is that I hope that these people report back to me as to how they liked the book, because that's what I'm really curious about. I know that I liked it as somebody who doesn't have a strong opinion about Dostoevsky, but I'm wondering how this book resonates with readers who have a strong opinion of Dostoevsky. So anyways, so yeah, I have gifted it 4 times, but that was my number 2 book. If you're keeping track at all, you probably already know what my number 1 book is, but I'll tell it to you anyways. My number 1 book was The Doctor's Blackwell, How 2 Pioneering Sisters Brought Medicine to Women and Women to Medicine by Janice P. Nimura. This was published in 2021 by W.W. Norton Company. Okay, so this is set in the 1800s, and it is following Elizabeth Blackwell and Emily Blackwell. And at this point in time, in the early 1800s, there aren't any female doctors. There are no women doctors in the United States, and globally there is a lack of, if any, female doctors. And so what Elizabeth Blackwell sets out to do, she gets in her mind to become a doctor. And it really is all about her efforts, her pioneering efforts in order to become a doctor. And interestingly, and then she has her younger sister, Emily Blackwell, and then it kind of shows how Emily Blackwell follows her sister's path. And since her sister Elizabeth was able to carve and trudge that path first, Emily's path to doctorhood, to being a doctor, was a little bit smoother. And I think that she was able to kind of stay in the profession a bit longer than her sister because of her sister's efforts in the medical industry and for women and so on. So here's what I loved about this book. This was the shortest. Let me see. Okay, here's what I loved about the book. I told my husband, I sat him down, and after I was done judging everything, and I was like, this is what I want. This is what I want from a book, particularly a nonfiction book. I want you to focus on one thing. Just one thing, and I want you to go deep with that one thing. I want it to be well researched. I want it to be done really well. I don't want you to do a bunch of different things. I don't want to see a bunch of different characters. I don't want to know a bunch of your opinions. I just want you to do one single thing, and I want it done really, really well. Is that too much to ask? That's what I asked my husband, and he was laughing at me, and he was like, no, that's not too much to ask. And I felt like of all the books, Janice P. Nimura was the person that chose one topic, the lives of these sisters during the time in their life, particularly when they were going through medical school and becoming doctors in the early 1800s. So she picked one thing and she wrote basically only about that. And what I loved about it was that I got a really good sense of Elizabeth Blackwell. She was a writer. She kept diaries. There was a ton of diary entries and a ton from her perspective. And all that she needed to do and how hard it was for her to pioneer the path to doctorhood. And then also there was like this discussion about how Florence Nightingale became a nurse basically at the same time as these women, as these Blackwell doctors became doctors, and yet we remember Florence Nightingale, and there is a reason to that, and that is explored. I just really enjoy this. I also liked that Nimura didn't put her subjects on a pedestal. There were some things about the subjects that were really interesting, like Elizabeth and Emily Blackwell were early pioneers against slavery. They had very strong beliefs against slaveholders and about humans being property, which was really, really interesting. And yet, on the flip side, something that was quite a bit less flattering than for them that Nimura explored and talked about, and actually was very firm about how she didn't like this about the sisters, but the sisters were quite harsh towards other women and towards other women in the medical field, and they had quite a bit of opinions about other women that were not very nice and that were not highly regarded. And what I thought Janice P. Nimura did was that she didn't, make these women seem evil because they didn't hold high opinions for other women. But she also made it sound and made it clear that it was not okay the way that these women viewed the world, and that these, I don't want to say it's not okay, like as if we're judging, but the sentiments they held towards other women weren't very flattering for them. And yet she didn't shy away from showing that aspect of the women. So basically this, I just thought it was so well edited. It was so well done. Nimura did a ton of research and she was able to put it together really, really well. It was very readable. There was no repetition. She was able to transition well. And the subject was interesting. It was fascinating. And I felt like I got a really deep dive into how women became doctors in the United States specifically. So all of these writers were new to me, and I'm walking away with this thought that the only author I would be really, really interested in reading something else by them is Janice P. Nimura, because she was such a concise and well-researched writer who was also quite entertaining and really enjoyable to spend time with. The other author that I would be curious about, only mildly curious, is Walter Isaacson, because he has books that aren't based around current events, and I would be curious as to what his writing would be like in a more historical setting, because I think he is a very good and well-developed writer, but the topic and the way the book was marketed and some of his approach to the Codebreaker wasn't my favorite. So those are the two authors that I would definitely explore or be open to exploring in the future. But yeah, Doctors Blackwell was definitely my top pick, and I was really glad to see it move on. Now, I will say I don't know how well it will do for future rounds because it doesn't have a huge emotional pull, and it doesn't have likable characters. The subjects aren't very likable in it. So I'm curious as to how the book will shake out in future rounds, and I wouldn't be surprised if it got knocked out for something a little more emotionally wrenching and a little bit more relatable for more people. But it was my favorite of the round, and I really, really enjoyed it. But yeah, anyways, I will stop rambling. At this point, I'm just rambling. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your grace in telling me that I misinterpreted the Booktube Prize rules, and now I can, you know, chat with you about all of my rankings and my thoughts. So I hope that it was worth it. Yeah, and you know, failed on a couple levels. I failed putting on my makeup in front of the camera. I did most of it off camera, and I failed at being able to talk about the Booktube Prize in the right way, at least with that first video. But you know what? We're not talking about our failures. We can learn from our failures. And that's it. I'm going to stop rambling. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.